The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the History of Heavy podcast, the show that chronologically traces the history of heavy music, song by song, genre by genre. I am your co-host, Michael Huntsman, as always, joined by my other co-host, Northern California bred, not bred actually, Northern California grown, David Lieberman. Dave, how are you?
Representing NorCal at your service, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dave, tonight we are not talking about the Beatles, as I promised last week. When at the end of our Iron Butterfly episode, I said our next episode was to talk about the Beatles. That is not, in fact, the case. That song did not come out until 1969, so that will be a few episodes from now. We remain in 1968 to talk about our third power trio in 6 episodes or 5 episodes. We're talking about Blue Cheer tonight. But before we get into that, let me just check in with Dave, and then we'll get into the details of the episode. Dave, what is going on, my friend? Anything of note to share that does not take place in the year of 1968?
No, I got nothing. I've been looking forward to this episode and looking forward to our podcast because there is nothing else good going on. This is the best thing going on.
This is the best thing going on. There is one thing, and our episodes that have gone long, and I will try to make this as short as possible. Our episodes that have gone long of late, we try to keep them around 40 minutes. Some of our episodes of late have gone around 50 or plus, is primarily because at the top of the show, we start to wander off into Black Sabbath land and talk about Black Sabbath. I only mention them here because Dave shared a very interesting photograph with me today about his refrigerator that has a Sabbath mode. So I can't think of a more appropriate person than Dave Lieberman to buy a refrigerator that has a Sabbath mode. I don't know what the fuck that means. I assume it shuts down for worship, but yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Well, I told my brother and he said, "Is it black?" And I said, "No, it's."
Yeah, that's pretty good stuff. So those of you out there shopping for appliances, make sure it has a Sabbath mode.
That's right.
But
that's right.
We will not digress into Black Sabbath land.
I forgot about that. That was like 2 hours ago. I already forgot.
Well, good. We will get very, very deep in our friends from Birmingham in about 5 episodes, which is definitely going to be a long one. We'll try to keep this one nice and tight. But let's get started with Dave's Cultural Corner and talk about our continuing conversation about the year 1968. Dave, take it away.
Dave's Cultural.
Okay. As we've discussed, 1968, we're splitting up between several bands, so I'm just going to give you a couple highlights. But one interesting highlight that I found, a personality associated with Blue Cheer, our band tonight, and fell into a bit of a rabbit hole, and so I want to share it with you all. So a couple highlights. 1968, July 17th, our old friend Saddam Hussein becomes vice chairman of the Revolutionary Council in Iraq after a coup d'etat. His journey starts back then. July 18th, the semiconductor company Intel is founded in what becomes known as the Silicon Valley of California. July 20th, the first International Special Olympics Summer Games are held at Soldier Field in Chicago with about 1,000 athletes. Meanwhile, so July 18th, the semiconductor company Intel is founded. August 11th of that year, the last steam passenger train runs in Britain. So this we're handing off. The old is sunsetting and the new is on the rise. And then August 22nd to 30th was the 1968 Democratic National Convention, which were famous for the protests. Police clashed with anti-Vietnam War protesters outside the convention, which ended up nominating Hubert Humphrey for US president. So those are some highlights of a couple of months, July, August of 1968. We'll talk about the following couple months in the following episodes. But in my research about Blue Cheer and listening to this band, it turns out that Blue Cheer took their name from a popular brand of LSD brewed by Augustus Owsley Stanley, the celebrated San Francisco acid chemist, who was briefly the band's patron. I was like, that's an interesting name. And I fell down a little rabbit hole, and I would like to share a little bit about Augustus Owsley Stanley III with y'all. So he was an American-Australian audio engineer and clandestine chemist. He was a key figure in the San Francisco Bay Area hippie movement during the 60s and played a pivotal role in the decade's counterculture. Under the professional name Bear, he was the sound engineer for the Grateful Dead, recording many of the band's live performances. Stanley also developed the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound, one of the largest mobile sound reinforcement systems ever constructed. Stanley also helped Robert Thomas design the band's trademark skull logo, the steal your face logo. Called the Acid King by the media, Stanley was the first known private individual to manufacture mass quantities of LSD. By his own account, between 1965 and 1967, he produced at least 500 grams of LSD, amounting to a little more than 5 million doses. Wow. He was the scion of a political family from Kentucky. His father was a government attorney. His paternal grandfather, Augustus Owsley Stanley I, was a member of the United States Senate after serving as governor of Kentucky in the U.S. House of Representatives. Interestingly, without having graduated high school, he was admitted to the University of Virginia, where he studied engineering for a year. And despite maintaining a 3.4 grade average with minimal effort, he dropped out because of his disinclination for slide rules and mechanical drawings. Counterculturist, no slide rules for this guy. He secured a position as a test engineer with Rocketdyne in Los Angeles. And in this capacity, he worked with the Navajo supersonic cruise missile. In June 1956, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force as an electronics specialist, serving for 18 months, including stints at the Jet Propulsion Lab and Edwards Air Force Base rocket engine test facility before being discharged in 1958. During his service, he secured an amateur radio license and general radio telephone operator license. So he had this interest in sound engineering, but like dropped out of high school, went to college anyway, ended up working at JPL as a rocket scientist. Like he's not a scientist, but he's a rocket tech. Later, inspired by the 1958 performance of the Bolshoi Ballet, he studied ballet in LA, supporting himself for a time as a professional dancer. In 1963, he enrolls in University of California at Berkeley, where he became involved in psychoactive drug scene. He dropped out after a semester, took a technical job at KGO TV, and began producing LSD in a small lab located in the bathroom of a house near campus. His makeshift laboratory was raided by police in 1965. He beat the charges and successfully sued them for the return of his equipment. The police were looking for methamphetamine, but found only LSD, which was not illegal at the time, as its classification as a Schedule I controlled substance in the US did not occur until our year 1968. In September 65, Stanley became the primary LSD supplier to Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. By this time, Sandoz LSD, which was the pharmaceutical company in Switzerland, sold under the trade name Delicid, was hard to come by, as Sandoz halted LSD production in 65 after growing government protests, which meant that Owsley acid had become the new standard. He was featured most prominently at the Freakout at the Muir Beach acid test in November 65, The electric Kool-Aid acid test, which Tom Wolfe's book details the history of Kesey and the Merry Pranksters in that. He also provided LSD to the Beatles during filming of the Magical Mystery Tour, and former Three Dog Night singer Chuck Negron has noted that Owsley and Leary gave Negron's band free LSD. Stanley met members of the Grateful Dead in 1965. He both financed them and worked with them as their first sound engineer, along with his close friend Bob Thomas. Stanley designed the band's Steal Your Face logo. During his time as a sound engineer for the Dead, Stanley started what became the long-term practice of recording the Dead while they rehearsed and performed. His cassette recordings of shows also proved useful for the band to review post-show and critique their performances. From at least the mid-60s until his death, Stanley practiced and advocated, weird guy, an all-meat diet, believing that humans are naturally carnivores. He argued that rare red meat was a complete food and that a diet of such is optimal for human health and longevity. He held many radical opinions on biology and nutrition, arguing the body could not store protein or fat as adipose tissue, but would instead simply excrete it if consumed in excess, and that only consumption of carbohydrates and sugars could make someone obese. He also theorized that diabetes was not technically a disease, but actually the term for damage wrought by insulin, and that adopting a zero-carb diet would treat this so-called disease. Sidebar, as a guy who recently was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and went on a high-protein, low-carb, low-sugar diet and am no longer in the diabetes zone, motherfucker was right.
Except he died in his 60s.
He died in a car crash.
Oh, okay, okay.
From at least the mid-1960s until his death.
Oh.
So, in addition to his large archive of Dead performances, Stanley made numerous live recordings of other leading 1960s and 1970s artists appearing in San Francisco, including Commander Cody and his Lost Planet Airmen, New Riders of the Purple Sage, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Jefferson Airplane, Early Jefferson Starship, Old and in the Way, Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Taj Mahal, Santana, Miles Davis, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, Johnny Cash, and Blue Cheer. Finally made it back.
That guy has led like 50 lives.
A lot. And like this time period is so enigmatic. I can't think of them. That's not true. There's a bunch of enigmatic characters like this floating around. A whole bunch. Ken Kesey himself was like this.
Yeah.
Tom Wolfe himself was like this. Like a whole bunch of these dudes were like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to drop out of high school and just go to this college. And then, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to be a ballet dancer and I'm going to work at JPL. And I'm going to, what?
Right.
What? Just nuts. And in a time when vegetarianism is gaining a lot of steam, he's on a rare red meat diet. You know, like, talk about counterculture.
It's funny because his bear persona, if you will, I'm very familiar with. You know, he the creation of their mobile recording unit and the logo and being the soundman. I totally am aware of that person in the Grateful Dead circle. He's featured prominently in the Altamont book. But I had no idea he had all these other lives. That's pretty wild.
It's nuts. So I figured that was an important persona to bring into the conversation because Blue Cheer was one of his LSDs, and it completely dovetails into what we're going to talk about.
Yes, sir. We are going to talk about Blue Cheer. That was extremely interesting. Thank you for that. The band Blue Cheer, not the acid Blue Cheer, the band Blue Cheer was formed in San Francisco in 1966 by singer-bass player Dickie Peterson. Though originally a four-piece, the lineup was trimmed down to a power trio after they saw the Jimi Hendrix Experience perform at the Monterey Pop Festival. We talked about Jimi just a couple of episodes ago. The remaining lineup consisted of Peterson, guitarist Lee Stevens, and drummer Paul Whaley. Their debut album, Vincebus Eruptum, which very loosely translates to The Line Bursts in Latin, was recorded in North Hollywood, California, and released on January 16, 1968 by Philips Records. The album was both a commercial and critical success, peaking at number 11 on the Billboard 200. Its lead track and first single was a cover of Eddie Cochran's 1958 hit Summertime Blues, and that single would hit number 14 on the US singles charts, becoming their most recognizable song and the subject, as it would happen, of tonight's episode. The song, the album, and Blue Cheer in general has since been lauded as a key contributor to what would become 70s hard rock and heavy metal. AllMusic describes Vincebus Eruptum as a glorious celebration of rock and roll primitivism run through enough Marshall amps to deafen an army. Pitchfork gave the album 9 out of 10. Billboard said it was the epitome of psychedelic rock, while VH1 called it an acid rock masterwork. In 1998, The Wire included the album on their list of 100 records that set the world on fire, calling it a seminal album that snarled rabidly in the face of hippie innocence and soon became a Hell's Angels party stomper. But my favorite review, and maybe the most relevant to tonight's conversation coming on the heels of our Hendrix episode, came from Rhapsody, who included the album on its list of 10 essential proto-metal albums and suggested that the band not only inspired the term power trio, but they also practically invented heavy metal. Lots of other artists have obviously covered Summertime Blues, but most notably, besides Blue Cheer's version, was The Who's, which originally appeared on their classic 1970s live album, Live at Leeds. The song has been used in tons of movies and TV shows over the years, including Caddyshack, This Boy's Life, and Beverly Hills 90210. Shout out to Brenda Walsh. And that's kind of the legacy of the song. But really, the question remains, Dave, is there in fact a cure for the Summertime Blues?
Wow, this is it. If there is one, this is it right here. LSD is probably the cure.
Yeah, right. This song, all of those reviews and kind of the legacy and the history of the song that I just sort of rattled off, encapsulates so much of what we have said about so many songs and artists that have come before it, but maybe had not been articulated as clearly as all of the praise for Blue Cheer. That is the creation of heavy metal, the term power trio, the Hell's Angel party stomper, which is great. It seems like, I don't know that Blue Cheer was doing much different sonically than Iron Butterfly. We just talked about In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida last week. But it does seem like Blue Cheer almost personifies everything heavy up until this point.
100%. And you really touched on something there, because sonically they really aren't very different than Iron Butterfly, especially this song versus In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. If you sort of solve for the organ presence in In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, there's a very similar guitar shimmer almost comes to mind. It's like this heaviness with a high resonance in there somewhere.
Like there's a lot of reverb on the guitar.
Yeah, and it feels like siblings, but like this is the rowdy older brother.
Yeah, it feels more Blue Cheer feels more ramshackle to me. It's a little it feels a little bit more like the wheels are about to fall off.
Yeah.
Where In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida feels a little bit more precise and pounding and deliberate. Blue Cheer feels like it's about to fall apart.
Yes, very well said. Blue Cheer has a more chaotic, more raw and intense. There's more of an intensity there. but that's like more unhinged.
It's also more pissed. You know,
Yeah,
it sounds angrier than
yeah,
Iron Butterfly.
and like Summertime Blues isn't a particularly heavy song, but their version is super heavy.
Right. Right.
And like having the dimensionality that they bring to it, it just opens it opens it up in a new way, and you're looking at the same song very, very differently. And like listening to this song sounded like taking LSD to me. Like it sounded like that. I remember taking LSD and having this like perception of this shimmering, where like I could see what I was looking at. I didn't have hallucinations or anything, but the thing had more depth and kind of colory outline and like shimmer. And these chords are heavy, but there's this high reverb that adds this depth and this three-dimensionality. And the sound is so huge for three people. Dream is a power trio, and they sound big, but in a very refined way, a very precise way, right? To your point, this music sounds like unhinged. It just sounds very barely barely keeping it together. But not I'll come to it. There's something I'm grasping with, because they're completely confident about this, but they're like on a razor's edge. They're balancing on this razor's edge, and they're just flip-flopping around, reckless abandon, with full confidence.
Right.
They don't care.
There's something about the way they play it where the verse sounds like it almost restarts itself. You know, it does the da na 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 na, then it goes na 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 na. It sort of does this thing in between the verses where it almost feels like it's stopping itself and restarting, and that certainly lends itself to LSD. So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe there's an element there. You know, before we started recording, I'll always find a reason to bring it back to Black Sabbath. But before we started recording tonight, we were talking about which Sabbath song we were actually going to talk about in five episodes from now, and talked a little bit about how we didn't want to do some of the more obvious, you know, the eponymous title track, the, you know, War Pigs, whatever. For Blue Cheer, and you know, for example, you know, Iron Butterfly certainly falls in this bucket as well. But for Blue Cheer, as good as that album is, the only you have to talk about Summertime Blues. You know, like even though it is their most obvious, well-known kind of, it is the song from Blue Cheer. It is also the song we have to talk about in this context because it does check all of the boxes.
Yes.
Tell me about your history with them. What's your relationship to Blue Cheer? Because they do fit very nicely into that Cream Hendrix category that that I know you had, you know, love those bands.
Yeah, and let's just a sidebar real quick. Jimi Hendrix is this crazy weird catalyst at this time. Cream talks about how they saw him and were blown away. Blue Cheer talks about how they saw him and were blown away. I know that Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top is like Jimi Hendrix is his favorite guitar player. Lemmy was a roadie for Jimi Hendrix. Like Jimi Hendrix is this kingmaker.
He's like the eye of the storm.
Yeah, like a real interesting catalyst. And so this sound, this time, this zeitgeist, this stream of consciousness that's happening, has to be. We have to tie it to Jimi Hendrix a little bit. But my relationship to your question was backwards. I didn't know about Blue Cheer until I got into Sabbath, and then I was like, I want more stuff like Sabbath. And people were like, you should listen to Blue Cheer and MC5. I'm like, oh, okay. And so then I went backwards and I was like, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, I was reaching around my computer a minute ago because I took a trip down to Solvang in Southern California a little while ago, and went to this vintage motorcycle museum, and there the guy had these randomly had these, like, I don't know what these are called, but these are from the Big Daddy Roth collection
The rat
of,
face. It's like a
yeah, the Ratfink character and this like hot rod thing. These were used for making T-shirts and posters and stuff.
Uh-huh.
This is what Blue Cheer sounds like to me. Like this.
If you're
like this,
only listening to the podcast, it's like
right.
it's a hot rod. It's a rotted out.
It's a cartoonish hot rod with a cartoonish monster driving it,
Right.
with a fiendish, crazy grin on his face.
Fiendish is a good word. There's
Fiendish.
some fiendishness to Blue Cheer.
That's, yeah, and I couldn't. This is kind of what I was struggling at. Whatever, and maybe you can put a link to Ratfink in the description, because the visual helps. It's just this like confident but like just unhinged character who's totally comfortable in their own skin, but like way out there, buddy, way out there.
Right. There's definitely some garage in Blue Cheer too, that I don't really hear in Iron Butterfly. You certainly don't hear in Cream or The Experience, or the Velvets, or, we talked a lot about it with the Sonics and the Kingsmen, and even Link Ray, where there's some garage rock. I hear garage rock in Blue Cheer too.
I feel like it's less garage and more abandoned warehouse.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's in that same realm, but an order of magnitude different.
So I love that you use that phrasing, and you segued perfectly. So is this our first hint of heavy metal as described by some of those reviewers? Is this the first song? Would you call this song heavy metal, to give it a genre?
I would call this song heavy metal.
Yeah.
I would call it heavy metal because of the confluence of attitude, sonics, emotion. This is heavy metal. Whereas other songs that we've talked about intimate heavy metal. They suggest heavy metal. They nudge towards it. There's nuances of, there's echoes of, but I think we're there. I mean, proto heavy metal, I think, was the right descriptor.
I think so too. And we're still a little bit of ways chronologically, a year and a half or whatever it is from Sabbath's first record, which a lot of people consider ground zero. But I'm looking again at our list, Zeppelin certainly, but this is, this to me is kind of maybe the first one that you can, if the Stooges are kind of that first band that you can really call punk. I think maybe Blue Cheer is the first one, obviously debatable, but maybe it's the first metal record.
Yeah, and I think that when we pull back, they can be the first without being the most influential.
Oh, right? Yeah, for sure.
And being the first isn't always being the most influential. It's the crack of the ice, and then there's going to be a weight that just blows a hole in that when we get to Sabbath. But the ice keeps cracking and cracking, and all of a sudden we're going to have a hole in the ice.
Right, and there's still a real, there's the Eddie Cochran cover. There's a BB King cover on the record. Like it's more firmly rooted in kind of traditional rock and roll than certainly Sabbath. Yes. Despite the blues influence, Sabbath sounds wholly unique.
Yes.
There you could still hear the quote unquote rock and roll in Blue Cheer.
Yes. And especially the other songs on the album.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, hold on, my dog needs out. I was gonna say that, one of the big differences for me with this record and the Iron Butterfly record is this Blue Cheer record is really consistent all the way through. Like, Summertime Blues isn't, to me, it's the best song on the record, but it's not really an outlier. That's Summertime Blues sounds like the rest of the record. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida is so much better than anything else on that Iron Butterfly that it kind of sticks out. I think this whole Blue Cheer record is great and does sound like that proto metal that we mentioned, and that wasn't true for Iron Butterfly, and it's definitely not true of the song we're going to talk about next week.
I think Iron Butterfly sounds proto metal, but I feel like this is
the whole album though, or just that song.
No, just that song.
Yeah, because that's what I mean. That song stands apart from the rest of that record, where I don't think I think this whole we could have picked any song. Summertime Blues just happens to be the most famous and the best song on the record, but the whole record effectively sounds like that song.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree with that.
Did you maintain, do you listen to Blue Cheer with any regularity anymore, or did they kind of fall by the wayside for you?
So many bands have fallen by the wayside for me, and one of the fun things about this project is rediscovering like Cream and Jimi Hendrix, and like listening ahead a little bit Led Zeppelin, and oh yeah, these are great. These are great songs, these are great albums, these are great bands. And when I got turned on to them, I listened to them a bunch 30 years ago, and it's been a long 30 years. So there's been other stuff going on, and my musical tastes kind of, the pendulum swung all the way the other way into jazz and Latin jazz and funk. And
sure. There's only so many listening hours in a day.
Yeah. And I'm definitely, I've always really admired your ability to be an omnivore, an audio omnivore. Like, you're always listening to everything that you always listen to, and it's impressive. But for me, I get in these tracks where I just feel a certain way, and I've talked about this before in other episodes and the other podcast. I just have such an emotional connection and a personal connection to music that I listen to music to feel a certain way, or when I feel a certain way, I want to listen to music that feels like that. And it's difficult for me to bounce around on a playlist that goes back and forth from Dolly Parton to Minor Threat.
Right.
But I can like both.
Sure.
Individually. Like my wife, when we eat a plate of food, she's like, why are you only eating that thing? And then you eat the next thing over and the next thing over. And she's taking bites of everything at once. I'm like, because I don't know. That's how I do it.
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting analogy, because that is how I eat. Like you described, Monica, where I can't ever just have a single thing on my plate. I have to have multiple flavors, and I do eat them, over here, much like I listen to music.
I'll have things on my plate, but I eat one.
No, I understand what you're saying. I can't do that. That is just, I cannot do that. Okay, well, any other thoughts about Blue Cheer? We've talked about the Power Trio a lot when we talked about some of those other songs. Blue Cheer to me is one that sort of gets forgotten because they don't have this impressive overall body of work like the Jimi Hendrix Experience or Cream does. But
Even this album is only like 6 songs or something, right? Like,
yeah, I love that. Like the record is 6 songs and it's 32 minutes long. Like that's so perfect. Like that's so perfect. In and out. But that is where heavy metal that isn't very heavy metal. Heavy metal would get very long and bloated very quickly. So proto metal is probably appropriate. Anything else on these guys you wanted to hit before we duck out of here?
No, I can hear 1968. And you've asked me before, like, what genre would this be? Like, while we're calling it proto metal, this is psychedelic rock. Like, this sounds like 1968. It sounds like LSD. It sounds like counterculture, but it's the edgy part of it, and it pulls the edge. It's the counter in the counterculture.
That is what I think. That is one of the things that makes this time period of music so interesting and fascinating, and why people still talk about it to this day. Where if you talk about the 90s, I mean, I guess people talk about the golden age of hip hop and people talk about boy bands, but most people go immediately to grunge. Grunge is the sound of the 90s. If you think about the sound of the 60s, well, yeah, it was Blue Cheer and Cream and The Experience, but it was also Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Pet Sounds and the Kinks, and like all as the popular music. All as the popular music, not just the boy bands or just the whatever. It was like all of that was popular.
Right.
Which is, I mean, God, what a wealth of amazing shit.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there wasn't as much of a schism yet, right? The schism is sort of forming at this time, where you get all the way to hip hop and grunge.
Right.
But at the time, there's blues and rock and roll. There, country, bluegrass, and blues, right?
Yeah. CBGB.
Right. So that's what you've got, and everything is still very close to that. Something that occurs to me is that you said that an ex-Hell's Angel was their manager. This is the Outlaw. This is the Outlaws sound, right? They're the outlaw of the counterculture of this graduating class of 1968.
We really should have led with that. That's exactly right. They sound like an outlaw band in a way that none of the bands we've talked about before have sounded. Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That's what I've been trying to tease out.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. Okay, let's not spoil the moment, because that was perfect.
That was perfect.
But let's see how the song fares. Both of us have a current in our Song v Song champion. We're both currently holding In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida as our current champion. We've touched on that song throughout this episode. Does Summertime Blues take that song down for you this week, or are you going to take In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida on to next week?
I'm going to take In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida only because I have a longer relationship with them, and I find that the theme is a little heavier, but this is a 9 to a 10. You know what I mean? Like, this is barely a win.
Yeah.
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida is barely a win for me.
I hear you. I think it's a little bit clearer.
You catch me on a different day, and I would flip. Like,
yeah,
it's that close.
Summertime Blues is one of those songs where I don't think of it as being as badass as it is, and then when I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, this song's fucking badass. Right. Where In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida to me is just like, well, duh, it's fucking great. So for that reason, I'm gonna take Iron Butterfly. But you're right, the Blue Song Cheer is fantastic. So we'll see how Iron Butterfly fares next week, when we will not be talking about a power trio. We will continue in 1968 though for just one more episode. So you've got to get the Cultural Corner all wrapped up in 1968 next week, when we will be getting into the crazy world of Arthur Brown to discuss his classic Fire, because he is the god of hellfire. So that will be a fun conversation. Until then, yeah, very interesting guy. And talk about influential in a whole bunch of ways. So we will get into Arthur Brown next week. In the meantime, subscribe and like and follow and yada, yada, yada. And as always, keep it heavy. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Bye.